In today's tutorial, you're going to learn how to make a looping animation using the new Fracture Voronoi tools in Cinema 4D. Let's go! Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Nick here from Greyscalegorilla, giving you the tools, training, and tutorials to help make you a better motion designer. Now today we're going to play around with some of the new tools in Cinema 4D R18. We're going to use the Fracture Voronoi object. Before we do, I wanted to make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. We have a lot of videos like this coming out soon, and we want to make sure that you see them all. Also, if you haven't checked out our Intro to Cinema 4D series, I'm going to link it up here and down in the description. It's a completely free way to learn Cinema 4D right now. So hope you check that out. Let's head right into today's tutorial. We're going to be playing with the Fracture Voronoi tool. Like I said, that's a new tool in Cinema 4D R18. We're going to make a really fun looping animation using some of these tools. And then a little bit later in the tutorial, I'm going to show you how I used Transform, which is one of our plugins, to really create an animation with no keyframes and to be able to experiment with your animations using Fracture. What's really cool about the Fracture Voronoi tool and Transform is that they work together really well. I'm going to show you that toward the end of today's tutorial. So stick around for that. Let's head on right into Cinema 4D and let's get animating.
All right, here we are in Cinema 4D. Here's our model, and I got the model at Turbosquid. You don't have to get this exact model, obviously. You could use any model that you have laying around, anything that you want to break apart. I just wanted to show you where I got this one, and if you did want a Rose, you can actually go sign up for Turbosquid and get a free one here. There's some free models you could download and follow along with, so it's up to you. You can make it, get that, or just use any old object you have laying around just to get the technique. All right, so what do we do now? In this case, if you download a model, oftentimes it will come kind of untextured like this, but the materials will be set up. You may have come across this in the past, and so I wanted to make sure if you're following along with a model that you download that you kind of see how to set up some of these textures. Because what's nice is we do have all the textures from this Rose. They're just not assigned really properly. So the first thing I do if this happens is I go remove unused materials just to make sure I'm not messing around with anything. Next thing I do is I just open a random material and I start assigning colors to it, okay? Just to see what everything is, because I want to make sure I assign it properly. Well, that was easy. This first one was the Rose here, right? And then if we were using these other parts of the model, which we're not in this tutorial, but if we were, I would just grab it and go, all right, what's pink? All right, looks like the thorns are pink, right? So now I could rename this or go find the thorn texture, whatever, right? In this case, we're only concerned about the front part of this. So in fact, let's just go delete everything else in the model. Boom. I'm going to do this again. Remove unused materials. Look, we only have one. Okay, so now how do we texture this? Well, this model came with some textures, not only for the color channel, but also for the bump channel. So this will be pretty easy. We're going to go to our color channel and add a new texture right here. And right in this maps is the flowers texture. So let's open that up. And it's asking if I want to add this to the search path. I don't. I just want to leave it right where it is, so it could always find it. And now I'm going to do the same thing in the bump channel. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to come in here and grab this bump. It's already set up. Look, it's all black and white, ready to go. You want it in the search path? No. I am going to turn up the bump strength, though, because it's going to give us a little bit more kind of realistic bumpiness. And when I hit render, look at that. Already, we got a pretty nice looking set of reflections. There's no shadows going on here. This is really basic, but already looking very pretty because we have those color channels and everything else ready to go. In fact, later on in this tutorial, I'm going to texture this, add some top coat, and then use an HDR to light it. But if you want a really fast rendered way to do this, you can actually just leave this specular channel as is and maybe play around with the width, a little bit and kind of dial this. I want it wider, but not as tall. And then I want it not white, but a little bit red, like a light red. And that will give you a little bit more realistic look. There you go. Check that out when you start to render. So, if you want a really fast rendered way to do it, you could do this. But later in the tutorial, I'll show you how I ended up with my final result. All right, so what do we do now? Well, let's break this thing apart. It's probably what most of you are here for, is to learn some of the new Fracture stuff. So let's get this set up in place. I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees just so we're kind of facing up, because eventually we're just going to fly a camera through this thing. And yeah, I think we're good. I am going to scale it up a little bit. The scale of this thing as it came in was really small. See this cube? That's like our standard cube. Look at how small this thing is. And sometimes when I get cameras and dynamics and all the shatters and all the stuff that we're going to play around with, it can get a little tricky with the smaller objects. So I'm just going to scale it up just a little bit. And let's start to break this apart. So let's go to Mograph menu, go to Voronoi Fracture. I'm just going to pull this whole thing in here. And already you're going to see it's going to start to break this apart. Now, we go into all these settings in other videos, so you can check that out. But today, we're just going to be worried about the point amount right here. We could turn this up, and as we do, we're just going to start to get more points and more little bits and pieces. So we can just kind of dial this up until we get what we want. In this tutorial, I'm going to keep it relatively low, just so we can kind of see it quickly. 200 isn't that many, really, for shatter, for fracture, but we could always turn this up and down when it comes to render time. And that's what's great about the built-in Fracture now, is it's parametric. It's non-destructive is really what I should say. And this means that we could change stuff at any time without having to re-break it. So here we go. We got that. And then what are we going to do for the effect, right? How do we start to animate this? Well, what you could do is use any of the Mograph effectors with the Voronoi Fracture. That's why it's in the Mograph menu. You can actually come up here and say, all right, I want a random. So let's just start with the random. And I'm just going to turn down the strength of the random. And look, as we turn it up, each one of those little pieces kind of flies off into nowhere, right? Well, that's not a very pretty looking effect. So what else can we do? Well, you could go in and add a linear fall off to this and scale the fall off down. And we also have to turn up the strength here. And basically, as you run the fall off through, you can animate this thing flying around. You could also add a scale and kind of scale it down to nothing, and try some other effects as well, right? All these Mograph effectors work. You could try the new push apart effector and get a cool effect. And depending on what your model is, your effect could be a little bit more, robotic or whatever, right? For the flower, I wanted this really kind of delicate looking effect. And so for my version, I ended up using Transform. Now, Transform is our plugin that basically takes a lot of what Mograph can do and makes it really easy to set up and use. And if you don't have Transform, that's okay. You could do some of those effects that I showed you in the Mograph menu, some of these random things. If you do have Transform, you could just put it in. And what's cool about the Fracture object, the new Voronoi Fracture object, is it works perfectly in Transform. If you just set it to cloner mode and refresh your scene, all of our effects work with the Fracture object. So in this case, this is the Transform one. I'm just going to turn this down. And this isn't really a very pretty preset, but that's the point about Transform, is you could come in here and just pick another one. So there's butterflies, which I think is going to be the one that we use. There's dust in the wind. This one's kind of fun. This one kind of flies off. And in fact, if we had a more sideways camera angle, you could see this kind of has a cool effect here. And again, we could just kind of play with some of these. Dissolve might be good. Some of these movements might be a little high. You could just turn that down. Dissolve might be actually kind of pretty as well. The one I ended up using is butterflies. You can also set your own custom animations, but these presets are here to make it really easy. I'm going to turn the movement down, and I'm also going to turn the rotation down, and this is just going to affect how far the particles travel. I'm going to turn that down even more, 20 centimeters. So just to give it a real kind of basic move. And then if we're looking at this from the top, we could just kind of see what is going on. And that looks really pretty good to me. It's very delicate feeling. The timing looks good. And we're going to have this animated camera flying through here and then revealing the other rows below it. Okay. So We could set up some different timings on this. In this case, I'm going to tighten up the fall off so it's not so random. And that just means it's more like a wave that's going through the flower instead of it being more random. And again, all these settings are in Transform just to make it really easy to set a scene like this up and then also alter it. So if we want the orientation to go bottom to top, we could just reverse this. And now it's going to go bottom to top. You don't have to reanimate anything. You just tell it which way you want to go. And in fact, if you wanted it to go faster, you could just pick your movement, your start frame and end frame, and say, okay, I don't want you to start until frame 8, and I want you to be done by frame 80. So this will speed up the whole animation quite a lot. Boom. And now we're holding a little bit longer and then moving, right? So all these settings are here. I won't get too much more into top code other than just to finish this, but I wanted you guys to know, I reach for some of our tools to do projects like this because it's that easy to start to play with this stuff and to get the results I want. So, okay, so now let's get the camera animation going. And the camera, you can animate using keyframes. I'm going to reach for signal because this is why I made signal. Keyframes could get a little hairy for me. In this case, I just want to animate the Y position. And I just want to set this up very quickly. I animate the Y position of our camera. Let's go ahead and look through our camera. On frame 0, okay, I want us to be way out here. On frame 90, I want us to kind of be like in the middle, in the mix of this thing. In fact, if I turn off Transform, I can kind of see where I'm going to be. I can't do that. I'm going to actually have to just go refresh this, come back, and just kind of eyeball it. That's not far enough. Let's zoom in, and then just replay the animation. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's start to work on our timing. First of all, the main thing we really got to do is kind of make sure we're centered on this thing, first of all. Second of all, this camera move, I want it to be linear. I'm going to select both of our keyframes, and I'm going to select linear. And this is going to give us this constant feeling of animation. And this will be helpful because we're going to build an animated GIF out of this. We want this constant movement, like we're just constantly zooming in. And if we have a linear, it'll be easier to kind of comp all this in After Effects. So there's our move. Looking good. I kind of want to move a little bit faster. So that just means I want to get there faster. So I could actually speed this up in Signal. I want to say this really should be like a 70 frame animation. And I'm just going to clip our render time, 71 frames instead of 70. So now our timing, boom, we're a little bit closer during all that. In fact, I'm going to back up our camera even further so we're zooming in faster. I want to start a little bit further away. There we go. Boom. Boom. Just going to let it play a couple times. Kind of, what's the feeling of it, right? I want that overlap to happen. The camera zooming in, the animation doesn't start until right there. Maybe I want the animation to start a little bit earlier. I'm going to go into Transform and just set this to frame 5. This is going to kind of start our transition a little quicker. Boom, 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 boom. That looks pretty good. Okay, so once you're feeling it, we could start to, go texture and do the rest. Now, like I said, we have a pretty decent little texture here that renders super fast. You saw how fast this rendered. Let's move forward. You could see this light with this texture, and by the way, maybe a little bit of a fill light. So let's just grab a light here. Let's go to ambient illumination and just turn it up just a little bit, right? So now we just have a little bit of light kind of everywhere. And what I don't want, so that light turned off our main light. So we do need another light here. So let's just grab this second light. I'm going to move it way up. And now between those two, we could start to get a pretty decent look. This other light, I'm actually just going to use some soft shadows. Okay, so that's pretty good. And it renders very quickly, right? Not bad. So you can actually, if you want this really fast render and you don't want to get into the reflectance and all the HDR stuff that we're about to get into, you can kind of go in this direction depending on what your model is, okay? But as always, I'm going to show you how I got my final render. It's a little bit more complex than that, but it's really easy because we use some of our tools, including HDR Studio. So that's the first thing I'm going to add. Bring some HDR Studio in. In this case, we don't need the background. We don't need the floor. And the HDR is really here to light this object using image-based lighting. And what's nice is we can go dial in whatever HDR we want to use. So let's just grab like this church outdoor one just to have it set up. And when we hit render, we still have the same lighting. We have those lights that we set up. Well, if we turn those off and we hit render, we're going to get the camera light, but still, this is not changing anything, these lights. What we really have to do is add reflection to our object. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to turn off this specular so you can see what it looks like without any reflections. This is just, just the camera light. We're going to get rid of the camera light. We're going to start to turn on some global illumination for this scene because I think it'll look the best. But we're also going to add some reflection to this flower. And I'm going to use top coat. Now I have it docked over here in my interface, mostly because I use it so much lately. And I end up using top coat a lot of times with models that I get that are kind of pre-textured, ready to go. What's nice is these models are all set. They're looking nice. They got the bump patterns on them, but to add the reflection using the reflectance tools that are built in can get a little hairy, right? Just as an example, all the defaults kind of have these like chrome effects. So you really got to go in and dial it all down. And that's why we built top coats, so that you can start to add subtle reflection effects without having to mess with all that stuff. So in this case, this one looks pretty good. Look at this dull texture, this dull reflection. So I'm going to just click it. That's going to add the dull reflection. I'm also going to add some render settings, add render settings. This will give us some preset render settings to kind of check out our scene with. And I'm going to go to, let's go to Global Illumination Draft. This will just give us a low quality look, but a good idea look of what our scene is starting to look like. Okay, so check that out. Now we're getting real reflections from an environment. We're getting shadows. We're getting all this stuff on this flower. And this is where it's really fun because now that we have it all set up, we could change our HDR and get completely different looks. We could experiment with this look. Now, the first thing I'm noticing is the reflection is too white, right? It looks kind of plasticky. It doesn't look very soft and red or pink or anything. It's just real fake looking. So what we could do is go into our dull reflection and just change the color. So in this case, we're just going to use like a really light pink. We're just going to start to tint things a little bit red. And now you're going to see in the viewport, that's a lot more realistic. It's starting to pick up the color of the object. And this is really common when it comes to reflections. Many times, reflections will start to inherit the color of the object. As the reflections are bouncing off of it and around it, you're not going to get pure white reflection. You're going to get a little bit red, right? That's how reflections work. So that helped. Let's go into our modifiers and turn up the blur amount just a little bit. It's getting a little bit too sharp there. Just want to soften this up. And another thing we could do is just kind of add a little bit of global lights. Now you could add these global lights the way that I did. Sometimes I like to just go into the luminance channel, grab something kind of related to the color that we're working with here, and just set it really low. 6% might do it. But let's look at the difference. Do you see that? You see how it brightened up, gave us a lot more detail? Now, we can always clamp it back down in post, but by giving it that little bit of wash, it's going to start to bring out some detail that wouldn't be there if we didn't. So that's a trick I use all the time just to add a little bit of almost glow. Do you see it start to really bring it out? Okay, let's finish up our lighting and let's get into the rendering here. Let's go back into our attributes so that we can kind of check out some other HDRs. Now I'm using the European Holiday Collection here. You could just kind of click through and see what your results are. So you could click one and then in the viewport, you could see the results. Well, that's a nice one. Maybe we'll come back to that one. That was in the trees. But let's pick this one. This one has more of a blue sky. And I think we'll see that in the result. Look at that. That actually looks really nice. A little bit dark. We could kind of dial it up. Let's go 120, 130. Might be a little bright. But look at that. All that reflection detail and everything we're getting with these HDRs. Botanical gardens, I mean, it's a flower, so it might look good in a botanical garden. Well, that looks nice. It's a little bright. Let's move this back to 115 maybe. Dial that back. This looks pretty good. I like the outdoorsy kind of feel on this one. It really feels like it's in the sun. And it really brightens it up. So let's go ahead and use that. I think our transform's all ready to go. We can move kind of forward in the frame here and just kind of start to judge what these frames will start to look like. Now we're still in draft mode. We still have all these little shatter bits. That's looking really nice. Pretty good. As always, physical render looks amazing and can be a little bit slow to render sometimes, but this looks pretty nice. And when we add that little bit of motion blur and all that stuff, I think we'll be all set to go. So one of the last things I'll do here is turn off our interactive render region, and I want to just make a square output. So I'm going to go up to our top coat presets all the way up at the top here. And if you go here, what happens is anything you change here will filter down to all the other presets. And in this case, I definitely want that because I'm going to change the total output to 1280 by 1280. That's just going to make that a square render the way that I had it originally. And in fact, this square render makes me want to not have this camera as far out. And because we're using signal and transform, we can make these changes really quickly. That's where I want that animation to start. Boom. We're rendering, or we're zooming. Okay, so from here, I think we're ready to render. I ended up using global illumination on this scene. You might be able to get away with some of the light kit settings. Now, even though they're named light kit, all that really means is they're just using image-based lighting. And in fact, in the future, I think we're just going to change these to IBL or something like that, just to make them make more sense. So here we go. I'm going to use GI, though, on this scene, GI medium. That's going to give us all the nice little detail here. In fact, let's pull up our interactive render region. You'll see this will be a little bit slower of a render here, but a lot more detail as far as the reflections. Everything's looking pretty good. Look at that. I love the quality of that reflection right there. The subtlety of all those little shadows bouncing around in there. That's looking really, really nice. Cool. Okay, so I would kick that out as a render, and I would make sure to set up your alpha channel. So go to your render settings, go to save, turn on the save here, pick where you want all these image sequences to go. I use TIFFs, and I use 16-bit TIFFs. And then in this case, I do want an alpha channel, and I want a straight alpha. And when this comes out, when you render this, you can go bring this image sequence in After Effects, and then I wanted to show you everything else that I added in After Effects. It's really not a lot that I added, but these little effects at the end really help sell an animation, right? So in this case, let's just turn off our adjustment layer. And let's turn off our motion blur. And I'm just going to turn off in both renders here. And you're going to see without motion blur and without the color correction, this looks pretty good. But all those little shards are so sharp, right? That motion blur really helps sell a lot of effects in 3D. It's on most of my 3D renders. I'll come in here and add it. And so let me show you what I use. I use Real Smart Motion Blur. You could turn that on. If you have it, you can just go in your effects, add it. And I don't even use a motion map or anything. I just turn it on. It does a really good job in just kind of anticipating motion. And then you can see a lot more realistic, a lot more smooth looking, a lot more camera feel when there's motion blur. Don't forget, cameras introduce motion blur in almost every case, right? So you want to add these realistic effects. And adding motion blur in Cinema can really take a long time to render, and why not do it in After Effects if it looks this good, right? So if you want more information on RealSmart, check down in the comments below. I'll have a link to that. We have a lot of other tutorials where I use this plugin all the time. It's really a good tool to have just in your toolkit. All right, so how did I do the loop? Well, this is just a copy on top of a copy, and I just kind of hid this part of the animation. This part of the animation starts behind, zooms up, starts breaking, and then all I did was find where those things overlap. So I overlapped 2 animations. Sometimes you have to use 3 depending on your loop. In this case, I just saw this little blurry chunk right here, and I went to the other part of the animation and I found where that frame was. It's right there. And anytime you want to loop something, you don't want 2 of the same frame, so you just go back 1 frame, and that's your loop point, right? I'm going to set N, and now, boom, loop, and look, the loop is in the middle. The loop starts there. Okay, so you can choose your loop point wherever you want, really. Whoop, whoop, and that's it. On top of that, I added a adjustment layer, and this adjustment layer is on top of everything. This added a little bit of curves. I added some blue to the shadows, and I pulled down the blue in the highlights, and that just gave it a little bit more of a pink feel instead of this, like, well, this is pink, but this kind of softened it up a little bit, just removing some of that blue. And then there is no background, so if I do color adjustments on the background and you don't have a background, you could just add your background here. So you could add a solid, and in this case, I could just add a black solid, put it behind, and now I have some background to mess around with. In fact, you could put it on white if you want, right? So what's nice about that alpha channel is you really have some options when you get here. You could put this on top of anything. You could make it transparent if you want. Okay, one more thing I almost forgot. I wanted to bring this up before we took off, and it's this. It's Giftgun. I've been using this script a bunch in After Effects. If you have something like this, especially with animated GIFs that you're building in After Effects, Giftgun is a great way to do it. You literally set up your settings beforehand and you click Make GIF. Once you do that, it starts to render, it builds the GIF, and it exports it to wherever you set it up in your settings. I use it a ton. I just wanted to let you guys know that it also does that stuff. So check out Giftgun if you haven't already. I'll link that up in the comments as well.
Thanks again for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also, if Transform looked interesting to you, please go check it out on our website. It does a ton of stuff, including animate text, break pieces apart, and help you animate this stuff, again, with no keyframes. If you've ever had a client that said, I'm not quite sure what I want, and you just want to show them some options, Transform might be for you. All right, that's it for today. As always, thank you again for watching. I encourage you to keep learning, keep using all these new tools in your projects, keep playing around, and most of all, just have fun with this stuff. This stuff is super fun. Hope to see you in another tutorial really soon. Have a good one. Bye, everybody. Giving you the tools, training, and tutorials to help make you a better web designer? A better web designer? What site is this? Did you ever want to be a better web designer? Come along to Greyscalegorilla. Wow. Wow. Just wow.